Good afternoon, dear colleagues. For others, it is good morning. This is Ramon Poisson, AMIC Secretary General. Welcome to AMIC's second webinar, Practical Writing Tips to Get Your Research Published in AMIC Journals. Many of you joined us in our first webinar on April 3, E-Teaching in Times of Crisis. Thank you for joining us again today. Today's event is part of a series of activities we have planned in preparation for AMIC's 50th anniversary next year. Getting published in academic journals is a common necessity for researchers, scholars, and educators from all over the world. Perhaps this is more pronounced in Asia than in the West because there are fewer academic outlets in Asia. Academic research is recognized as an important element of higher education, and journal publication is one of the driving forces of research. Publication in refereed and indexed journal will significantly increase academic outputs or productivity and improve university ranking. In the Philippines, the Commission on Higher Education recently issued CMO 15 series of 2019. This new policy provides that publication in refereed and/or indexed journal is a requirement for earning a graduate degree. While our focus is getting published in AMIC Journals, that is the Asian Journal of Communication and Media Asia, I'm sure the lessons to be shared today will be very useful to all. I would like to acknowledge our panelists today, the editors no less of the Asian Journal of Communication and Media Asia. Professor Dr. Ang Peng Hua is editor of the Asian Journal of Communication. He's a professor at the Wee Kim Wee School of Communication and Information of Nanyang Technological University in Singapore and is chairman d'honneur of AMIC. Danilo Araw is the editor of Media Asia and is an associate professor of the Department of Journalism at the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication. I would also like to acknowledge AMIC Office Manager Fernando Academia for the preparation of today's webinar. Also, Upstream Media PH, our technology partner, webinar host. Professor Araw will moderate the session and explain the mechanics of the webinar. I wish you all a productive webinar. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon to all of you, or good morning, wherever we may be. So, as noted by Mr. Ramon Tuazon, this is the webinar on how to get published in Media Asia and the Asian Journal of Communication. So, each of us, Dr. Ang Peng Hua and myself, will speak for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, 15 minutes maximum, to give some practical tips on how to publish in our respective journals. And then after that, I will be moderating the question and answer portion. So I will be receiving your questions and then reading them out loud. And we will allow a short time to reply on the part of Dr. Ang Peng Hua and myself. So anyway, without much delay, I now give the floor to Dr. Ang Peng Hua. Professor, please go ahead.
Hi. Okay, good day. So I'm going to begin now with the presentation for 15 minutes and then leave the time for Q&A. Yeah. Screen is shared, right? Is the screen shared or is it not? Oh, I'm sorry. I have to share the screen myself. I see. Okay. Then okay. All right. So yeah. So in the beginning of this, right. Let's go back. Sorry. There's a thing called impact factor, and it's above 1. It seems kind of low, just a 1, but this tells you how much the AJC is cited. And right now, 1 is where we are. It's the highest ever. It talks about citation factor, and I'll come to this later. Okay, so for the AJC, the main thing is that we focus on theory. This is the main part of what is different about us, AJC versus Middle Asia. And by theory, what it means, would be things that are observable. There's an element of so-called prediction and explanation. So if you submit a paper to the AJC, you must in some way advance theory. In other words, you must somehow, I mentioned here, refine, critique, extend, or develop theory. So for us in the AJC, we do not see ourselves simply as what we call a test bed for Western theories. I see this quite a bit where somebody submits a paper and it basically applies Western theories to the Asian context, and then it says, well, it was confirmed, not confirmed. That's not good enough. You must say something new about the theory, something different about the theory. If you have just, for example, facts, empirical data, I was just talking to Dr. Aro just now that if you're, for example, talking about the media in, let's say, Iran or Pakistan or Afghanistan, these are very interesting. They're hard data, difficult data to get, but it would not fit the Asian Journal of Communication. They would be better fit for Middle Asia, right? So please note, the main thing about AJC is the focus on theory. So on the theory part of it, I know that many of you know about the quantitative elements here. There's a heavy American bias, to be sure, about quantitative data. And the American approach is tend to be, you have a theory, now prove to me the theory works. So people will go out and often get them quantitative data here. These are relatively easier to do. It's not easy. You still need to get data. It's not easy, but they build theory. It is enough if you build a small part of theory. It doesn't have to build a whole comprehensive theory, but to build a part of it, that's enough to get into the AJC. We require a representative sample. I've talked about this with my associate editors, and we came up with a number of at least 300. For some of the higher ranked journals, it may require a minimum of 1,000 even. So if you do not hit 300, I have articles coming for 280, 250, and we say it's a hard line, you need a minimum of 300. If you're coming from a place like India, 300 is arguably small. I know that, if you get a true random sample, 300, of course, it's possible to represent the galaxy. But in real life, you need a bigger number than that. So depending where you're coming from, you will often need actually more than 300. But 300 is the bare minimum to get into the AJC. Right? And I want to remind you again that your hypothesis here should critique in some way, criticize the theory, but you need data that criticize it, right? You need to refine it in some way, to improve the theory in some way, and maybe extend the theory to say that theory applies in these other areas. I've had to tell some people that they should look at previous issues of the AJC for samples and how this is done, looking at the framework. You need a clear hypothesis, you need the data, you need the analysis, you need the results. So the previous issues will give you a sample as to what we look for. Okay. Hang on, let me go back now. Theory. Okay, now on the qualitative side, we do accept qualitative data papers, but they are definitely harder to do. I get a lot of these, but they're actually harder to do because you need to make something similar, like propositions. For qualitative papers, the similar part of it is similar to hypotheses. We call propositions. We don't call them hypotheses, right? But in propositions too, you need to be clear, and you need to offer some fresh insights. So something new, something that not obvious, something different. So it's very similar in terms of output, in terms of what we're looking for with the quantitative side. Except this is qualitative, so you're looking at propositions, you're looking at insights. I would say that for many of us, and this applies to everybody actually, you should aim first for a conference. And the reason that the conferences are easier to enter, because if you look at the number of slots available in journal, it's really limited. Whereas conference, you can have a few hundred possible slots, so they're easier to get in. but you should aim only for comparatively peer-reviewed conferences. These two are important. If you do not get into a peer-reviewed conference, what happens is that you don't have the feedback, and actually you want a feedback to help you improve your papers. So you look for peer-reviewed conferences. Having said that, there are some closed invitee-only conferences that actually are very relevant in your area, maybe very relevant in the area. These are good too. They give you good feedback. Sometimes the deans or chairs or heads may not support these conferences, but these are actually important. So my point though is that for most of us, most of the time, the comparatively peer-reviewed papers are where you should be at. Okay, so what are some conferences to go for? At the international level, the two big ones are the ICA and the IMCR. The ICA is the one that I've been involved with, and then the IMCR also have attended, but on a less frequent basis. In our region, AMIC, of course, the big one to go for, and I will highly encourage you to submit to the AMIC conference. Unfortunately, this year, because of COVID, all these conferences have been cancelled in face-to-face. Some of them have gone virtual, so these are places to attend and submit to. APCA is a new one. This is an Alliance for Communication Associations. They are forming, so we'll see how this works out down the road. You have national conferences as well. I know PACE, I know SPCOM in Indonesia. There are others, in your national countries there. I would encourage you, of course, to submit to those as well. So these are possible venues for your papers before you submit them to the AJC or Media Asia. Okay, so now what we look for in the journal, right? So you should turn your conference paper into a journal paper. Okay, and sometimes editors, I sometimes look for papers that are good in the conference, and I invite the person to send the paper in from the conference to the journal. It is not a guarantee that it will be published because the journal still will send it for further review, but it's a good way to get the chance of being reviewed and getting some comments. You should know that when you submit your paper to the journals, you must conform to the house style. So do read up as well as to the house style when you submit. Okay, for the AJC, do look it up online. You can find it in your homepage. You will see information about the journal. You see the editorial board, and actually this applies across all journals. That you want to find out who are on the editorial board, whether it's a credible group of people or not. Look for the submission guidelines. So, for example, we haven't put it on yet, but we will put on to say that any quantitative kind of survey, you need a minimum of 300. Right? Often you get, not always, often you get acceptance rate, so it tells you what is the rate of chances of being accepted. In all good journals, they are now currently acceptance as a percentage of the total submissions is less than 10%. So less than 10% of articles that are submitted actually end up being published. For the AJC, it's very low. It's only about 7%, right? It's very, very competitive to get in. Okay, and I'll tell a bit more about this in a bit. Okay, when you submit, write a cover letter, right? A cover letter is not abstract, no? The cover letter tells the editor what the paper is about. Okay, so it's not abstract. I'm writing about this particular topic. What inspired you? Why did I write about this? What's so important about this? In a theory, are you challenging some theories there? How are you refining? So it tells me right away that your paper has some theory involved, right? So the cover letter is not about it's not abstract. It's not about the contents per se, not entire content, but it tells the editor like, okay, why did you do this paper, right? So this is what the cover letter is about. So if you look at AJC, you see this. You see all this. You see the cover letter here, okay? And the cover letter, again, remember, it's just a note to the editor. Hey, this is what this article that I'm sending you is about, right? It's not abstract. You can see abstract this in a bit. Okay, the abstract is actually the last thing you write. Okay, so actually, the very last will be the cover letter, maybe, right? But the last thing, right, for the whole paper. And the reason is that you've done everything here. So what you want to do is summarize the whole paper, right? Include two important elements here, the method you're using and the data. Okay, it can be very short, 2 words. Representative sample, right? That's enough for the method. Data, what's the sample, right? Your abstract is the one that researchers will look for. So it's important to keep in mind that you must use keywords so that you may be found, right? When people search for you. So they're searching in one area, let's say third person effect, right? You want a third person effect there, right? And so that when people search for it, your article will pop up as well. So this is not trivial, and some people just kind of blow it by, right? But it's not trivial. You want your article to be found and cited. So this abstract is actually an important part of it, but it's actually the last thing for the whole paper. Okay, so you see this part of it, it tells you how major it is, the abstract. Okay. When you submit, make sure it's clean, right? Check, double check, good English. I've seen some very obvious errors that the word file that I have is highlighting in your red double red lines. So you shouldn't have this kind of mistakes. No spelling mistakes. Check the house style and how different places have different house styles. So for us, we follow APA style, right? So please check. We allow both American and English spellings. So that's something to note, right? So, but please note a clean paper. I have rejected papers. In fact, I just rejected one this morning because the English wasn't good. When the English isn't good, the reviewers will reject it. I tell the reviewers, try to ignore the English. I know that in Asia, English is not the main language, but the reviewers are quite insistent, even though they may be from, places where they do not speak English as a first language, but still they insist on a good English paper for the AJC. Okay, so these are the criteria that we use, whether the paper clear is objective, conceptual rigor, the method is good, analysis is good, readable to language part of it, and how much contribute to the field, right? So these are this is very common across all journals. Okay, so when you submit, what happens is that you can get a desk reject, and this happens a lot. Desk reject, I would say for good journals, 60 to 70%. Meaning that it's not sent out for review, rejected by me, the editor, with the associate editor, because it could be, these are the reasons, a mission. We reject papers from Africa, because it's not about Asia. Or reject papers from telecommunication, not on communication. No theory, remember, the point about theory, that's very important, I get a lot of it. Poor data, your sample is not 300, we will reject it, right? Poorly written. So all these reasons, right, amount to about 60 to 70% of papers rejected, right? Often, right? So that's why the percentage is so low, because a high percentage get rejected upfront already. Okay. Now, good journals will give you good feedback. So in the case of the AJC, we often get about 2 pages of comments, 2 pages of single space comments, and we want such reviewers. We look for such reviewers. Reviewers who give short reviews, after a while we don't invite them back, and sort of goodbye, right? Others we don't get them on, and then they serve on the editorial board. Okay, here's the third one. The result will be that you get revised and resubmit. This is good. This is good news. A major revision is good news because it was not just rejected. You get good comments. Whatever you do, you will have a good result. It is possible to be rejected, by the way, after we did a major revision and it gets rejected, right? But you know that because you polished it, you can submit it somewhere else, right? So it is possible that after a major revision, you get rejected, but then you have a good paper, so you stand a better chance of acceptance elsewhere. A minor revision is also possible, it happens. In fact, just one, I rejected one this morning. It was very quick. The person submitted in April. In fact, April 14th, it's been accepted after a minor revision. So if a paper is clean, minor revision, it's possible to get it out quite quickly. Okay. The reviewing process, I put this joke at the end. It sounds scary, but you should know that at the end of it, whatever happens, you will get a good result. And for AJC, we definitely try to give you good comments so that even if you get rejected at the end, you will have a good result. Okay. So with that, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Ang Peng Hua. Actually, I can start my discussion now. But Professor, there is a quick question here, which maybe any of us can answer. The question is, do AJC and AMIC offer translation service? For example, a Thai journal article to English.
No, unfortunately for us, we do not. We do not offer this service. What some journals do is to select the best articles for a period and then translate those. But it's not as a matter of course. So it is possible that perhaps AMIC should look into this to select, say, the best articles from different journals in other Asian languages, and then translate them for AMIC and AJC and for Media Asia. Well, it's worth thinking about, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. So at this point, I will be the one to make the presentation for Media Asia. So you can see on your screen the PowerPoint presentation that I prepared. Basically, we just want to look at, okay, some facts about Media Asia, some information that you may want to have, keep in mind before submitting to our journal. Of course, what kind of manuscript do we process and do we publish? Some practical tips, just like what Professor Angpeng was said. So I will skip the things that he said and just add to some aspects that were not yet tackled deeply. And then some tips before submitting your manuscript that all of us may want to keep in mind. Some notes on academic writing, especially with regard to submitting to Media Asia, and then just some quick remarks on why you should consider Media Asia as a probable venue for your research. So just quickly, Media Asia, for those who may not be familiar, it was established in 1974. The current editorial board is composed of 4 women and 2 men. So we come from the Philippines, the US, and Hong Kong. Now, what kind of manuscript do we accept? Based on our call for papers that we released last February, we focus on practices in journalism, advertising, public relations, entertainment, and other aspects of media. Of course, these are very, very general. So in the next slide, you will see here some specific details as to what kind of research do we look at. So we go for relevance of the topic. So what do we mean by relevant? Of course, these are basically burning issues of the day. In journalism, we call them hot topics, right? Or hot issues. So some examples would be something about media freedom or the lack of freedom in the case of some countries, ethics, working conditions, ownership, about the campus press. We're open to accepting topics like that, the community press, corporate media, alternative media. I understand, for example, in Burma or Myanmar, it's not called alternative media, it's called expatriate media. But more or less, you get the idea that this is not mainstream, so it becomes classified as alternative. But regardless of the nomenclature that is used in your country, in your respective country, we accept under research topics like alternative media. Of course, we also want to look at literacy, language that's used in the media, because sometimes there is a debate as to whether or not English should be the form of or the medium of communication in the media, and we can forget about the local language. Of course, there are those who would say that no, local language is more important. So we want to look at studies that would explain such nuances. And of course, another under research topic would be culture of impunity and how it affects media practices. Your research can be community-based. We've had a lot of papers that focus specifically on a certain community, and we are open to that. It can be country-based, it can be a particular country in Asia, or sometimes we would also accept articles or manuscripts wherein we refer to a particular Asian community, but they are based in, let's say, a European or North American country. That's okay. I mean, when we say community-based, it doesn't have to be geographical. It can be cultural in orientation. So we're very, very open to such a wide, diverse concept with regard to Asia. Of course, it can also be a comparative study. For example, the state of journalism in the Philippines and in Indonesia. So those studies are more than welcome to be processed by Media Asia. So given the kind of topics that we have, That's where you can see the difference between Media Asia and the Asian Journal of Communication that was explained by Dr. Ang Pengwa a while ago. Basically, we look for some empirical studies on media without, of course, compromising on the theory. Because in order to process empirical studies, it, any any study would have to be anchored on a particular theoretical, conceptual, and operational framework. So we want to look at the basis for the theories that you have. Now, whether or not you will be able to advance the theory, of course, that would be ideal. But what we are looking for would be empirical basis to validate theories. If it can advance theories or revise theories, that's also welcome. So therefore, in terms of research methods, it can be a combination of qualitative and quantitative approaches. And I won't be surprised, especially for scholars who are studying in Europe, because the trend right now in doctoral thesis writing in Europe would be a combination of qualitative and quantitative studies. At least that's the impression that I get in the case of Germany. However, if you are just focused on qualitative studies, for example, you only have an in-depth interview or a focus group discussion, or you have a particular case study, that's okay. We will be more than happy to process the manuscript that you will be submitting. Or it can also be a quantitative study, a survey or a content analysis. But again, I would want to repeat the point that I raised earlier. Empirical study should still be anchored on a well-defined theory. So we cannot compromise empirical with theory. Okay, there will have to be a foundation by which you can make sense of the reality that you're discussing. Now, what are some practical tips? Of course, grammar, syntax, and diction, as mentioned by Professor Ang Pengwa, would be very important. Just like Asian Journal of Communication, we don't discriminate as to the kind of English that you have chosen to use as medium. It can be British English, it can be American English, because we do understand that there are countries that use British English for the most part. In the case of the Philippines, for example, we use American English. So for Filipino researchers, we don't require them to adjust to British English. So that's okay. But we are very strict also with regard to the citation style. For the Media Asia Journal, it is clear that the preferred citation style is APA. So I'm sure you know that there is a 7th edition APA that was released late 2019, late last year. So you have to brush up on that so that you can properly cite your sources. The word count, please consider this as just a benchmark so that you have an idea as to how long or how short the manuscript should be. So usually the abstract is 100 to 150 words. The manuscript, it should not be more than 10,000 words. So including tables, references, captions, and endnotes. From our experience in Media Asia, many of the manuscripts that we're able to publish would only have something like 7,000 words. So more or less, that gives you an idea. So with regard to the form, that's the case with regard to our practical tips. But let me just briefly give you an idea of what we're looking for in terms of content. So we want to have a clear outline. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not as if I want this to be the subheads or the headings of your paper, of your manuscript. But of course, you have to start with an overview or an introduction of your study. You have to give an idea of what your study is all about. And then you want to look at the state of research in the topic that you've chosen. Sometimes in depending on the nomenclature in the academe, sometimes we call it review of related literature. But the bottom line is you must be able to prove that you've done your research and you know the previous studies that were conducted with regard to the topic that you've chosen. Of course, there has to be a clear focus. What is the statement of the problem? And then we go to the objective. What do you seek to achieve in doing the study? And then the framework. What would be the theory that you've chosen? From my experience, many manuscripts provide the framework, but sometimes they do not explain why they've chosen a particular theory. It would have to be clear in your manuscript that you've chosen, for example, agenda setting theory because this is most useful in the course of your study and that it is, let's say, the framework that's been used in previous studies related to the topic of your choice. Bottom line, there will have to be an explanation as to why you've chosen the framework. The same case applies with your methodology. For example, if you've used content analysis, you must be able to explain why this method would be the best the best system to use in terms of achieving the objectives of your study. For example, why did you use in-depth interviews? Why did you not do focus group interviews? Why did you conduct a survey and why did you not conduct, let's say, a census of a particular community? Now, unlike in Asian Journal of Communication, the sample size, for example, if you submit a survey, it will be dependent on number one, the size of the community, the methodology, the overall methodology of the study. So it's possible for you to come up with a sample size of, let's say, 150, but you will have to be able to justify whether or not 150 is representative of the community that you've chosen. So we are quite flexible in terms of sample size, but you have to have a clear explanation as to why you come up with that number and why that particular number is representative of the study that you've conducted, that you've decided to conduct. Of course, the findings is a given. Usually, this comprises the bulk of your study because if your study is empirical, then the findings will have to be described properly, comprehensively, and the analysis will have to be in depth. Sometimes we reject articles that would provide only a description of the findings because what we're looking for, if you want to be scholarly in your writing, you must be able to deeply analyze the implications of the findings, of what you're able to unearth in the course of your study. Of course, conclusion and recommendations would have to be done. The conclusion, we have to remember, should be able to answer directly the statement of the problem. If you want to be specific, what we're looking for is a clear answer as early as the first paragraph or even or perhaps the first two paragraphs of your conclusion. You must be able to properly answer the statement of the problem. Aside from a clear outline, we're looking for clear data presentation. Of course, it's a given. If you have a clear outline, the presentation should be also clear. In-depth analysis, because as I said, even if it's empirical, it doesn't mean that your study will only be descriptive. You must be able to analyze deeply, critically even, the findings, and particularly highlighting the implications of whatever it is that you're able to get in the course of your field work. Of course, the arguments will have to be logical, and by logical, I mean it is based on a well-developed theory, or it is based on the empirical data that you have. And what is your contribution to knowledge? As mentioned by Dr. Ang Fenghua, the body of knowledge in a particular topic will be greatly articulated in the related study. Of course, based on the related studies or the related literature, you must be able to properly articulate where your study comes in. What does it contribute, if at all? Now, before submitting, these are just some practical tips. You can sometimes do an internal peer review process yourself by asking colleagues, for example, to read your manuscript. Of course, presenting it in conferences, as Dr. Ang Fenghua said, would be also very useful because that's also the time when you get comments from the participants in that conference through question and answer portions, or sometimes from my experience in international conferences, one of the most useful time would be the conference break, where everybody is having coffee or cookies or tea, and then you approach some of the experts to ask them what they think of the paper that you presented, or sometimes your colleagues themselves will approach you to tell you what they feel about your manuscript. So that's quite useful. But of course, asking your colleagues privately could also help. Please don't forget to edit your manuscript before submitting. From my experience, I've had, the sorry decision to reject some manuscripts because of the bad grammar, syntax, and diction. Much as I would want to accommodate as many manuscripts as possible, as Dr. Angpeng was said, reviewers are very, very strict about the manner of writing and the manner of presentation. The moment they read the first two paragraphs and the English is so bad, sometimes they will not even finish reading the manuscript and just say that. And sometimes they would even tell me, "Why did you submit this to me? Shouldn't you review this yourself first before you submit?" So things like that can happen. So please understand that sometimes even at the editorial board level, we have to do the screening ourselves. So it's best to proofread, edit, and revise before submitting. And of course, please ensure that you have read the information for authors. So that's also important. So some notes on academic writing. I don't want to state the obvious here, but we try our best to be as readable and as understandable to a broad audience. Most especially that Media Asia focuses on relevant topics. So my vision for the journal would be to have it read not just by academics, but also by media practitioners, journalists, among many others. So simple words instead of highfalutin words would be most preferred. There is a way to be scholarly without being too esoteric, because one other consideration is that sometimes academic journals like Asian Journal of Communication and Media Asia could be required reading, even for first year college students. So therefore, we don't just have conversations with our colleagues through our peer-reviewed journal. Sometimes the students themselves should be given the chance and the opportunity to read our work. So scholarly writing for me should be logical writing and persuasive writing. We cannot engage in esoteric or complicated writing where you may write in English, but sometimes people will read you 10 times before they can actually understand what you're trying to say. We don't want that. We don't want a situation where you will submit your manuscript and then the only one to read your manuscript will be your mother, and your mother doesn't even understand what you've written. So we don't want that. So of course, we want logical and persuasive writing. So to be specific here, writing clearly will be the key to being understood by many people. So why should you submit to Media Asia? So right now, in the spirit of transparency, I will tell you that for the year 2020, that's the time that I started my term as editor, we've received 16 manuscripts already. So three had been forwarded to reviewers, at least the ones that were submitted to me, that were assigned to me. So as editor, I have the privilege of assigning manuscripts to myself, as well as the five other associate editors. So I don't want to talk about how the other manuscripts are doing to the other associate editors. But for me, the ones that are assigned to me, it takes only usually about 1 day for me to decide whether or not it should be forwarded to reviewers. So among the three manuscripts, I've had already one reviewer submitting the evaluation and another one agreeing to review. So more or less, it's a good batting average considering that sometimes the review process takes a long time, right? So it's best to assign immediately. Of course, the average days from submission to withdrawal would be just 1 day. I was forced to refer another manuscript to another journal. Honestly, I should have just rejected it, but But as a matter of professional courtesy to this scholar who inquired about submitting to Media Asia, I had to just simply ask him to withdraw the submission. Now, rejection, I'm sorry to say, it can happen. On the average, between submission and the decision to reject, it takes about 8.83 days or about 9 days. The longest will be, what I include here will be one article that was initially forwarded to reviewers, but it required major revision, and then the author submitted the revision, but in our evaluation, we found the revision to be one thing. It was not able to fulfill the requirements set by the reviewers, so we had to reject the particular manuscript. But for the other manuscripts that were not forwarded to the reviewers, usually it takes us only 1 or 2 days to decide. Because as soon as I get a notification that an article was submitted, I do the screening myself. And given my training as a journalist and as an editor, I'm a bit quick to read and to evaluate articles or manuscripts. So I'm able to give feedback as soon as possible to the authors. Now, this is the last slide that I want to provide to you. If you want to submit to Media Asia, so you just go to editorialmanager.com, RMEA, and then /RMEA, and then everything else will be self-explanatory. But as I said, please read the information for authors before submitting. So anyway, these are just two of the references that I used for this particular presentation. So thank you very much for, okay. So thank you very much for this particular opportunity. And at this point, we should be able to entertain some questions. Okay. So yeah, Professor Angpengwa, are you still there? Hello?
Yeah, I'm still here, sure,
Okay.
of course.
So these are the questions for Asian Journal of Communication. Does AJC have a maximum word count for journal submission?
Yeah, I've given an answer of we have a word count 6,000 to 9,000 words.
Okay, 6,000 to 9,000 words.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Another question here. What are some good? Okay. So you've already answered, but maybe you have to repeat just for our viewers. What are some good books on research methodology that you can recommend?
It really varies a lot because the whole field is moving on. For example, now it's talking about network analysis, sentiment analysis. So I would recommend using your online searches to find good books, and then for more advanced methods, then you would explore accordingly. So it really depends on what you're looking for. I would say that there are some basic texts around. You can find them. I guess the library should have them. And then from there to advanced methods, but it really varies. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, okay. Another question for AJC: How many times does AJC allow when it comes to resubmission? So maybe these are manuscripts that were rejected, and it has to be resubmitted.
We have no cap. I guess the same as you, right? There's no limit as such. But it's just that the reviewers will come, but the associate editor will come back with comments, and we typically send the manuscripts back to the same reviewers, and we often say yes, we review it again as a follow up. So at some point, there's just sort of coming to dead end. There's no point moving on, and then we'll cut it and say, there's no point going on. It really again here there's big variation. Most of the time I would say as a method sort of default, I would say up to 2 times, because if you don't cut it after the second time, then you probably will not cut it. Yeah. But I have had experience, by the way, of talking about in general, right? Working with somebody in India, and he and I have revised the manuscript. Okay, I guess you may not believe it, 58 times. 58 times, 58, right? It's still hanging right there somewhere, and if you come back to another revision, it's 59. The different reasons, but we've gone through it 58 times now. Yeah.
58 times. So just out of curiosity, Professor, how many years did it take to make those 58 revisions? 58 times, yes.
Yeah, it's taken many, many years. In fact, I'm very worried the data is out of date. The survey was done in 2013. Yeah, and then you publish, but then there's different reasons why each journal, each site got rejected. So anyway, it's now 58 times. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Now, okay, so there's another question. I heard the news from my supervisor in a certain country. She said that this particular supervisor said AJC mostly accepts only the research articles with quantitative research method. Is this true?
No, it's not true because we also accept qualitative papers. It's just that qualitative papers are actually harder to write and they tend to be very descriptive. So in fact, I'll come back to question 4, the hypothesis and propositions. So it's very clear for quantitative papers, right? It's your hypothesis 1, H1, H2, and so forth and now. But for qualitative papers, people forget that you need something like that to reflect rigor as well as the structure. So you need to put up some proposition. So I just one proposition here to say, for example, right, that media, because they're under stress, to currently tend to support incumbent government. Let's say it's a qualitative statement. It's qualitative because you can't prove it quantitatively. You need a minimum sample of 30, for your analysis to work, and you won't have 30, media in any major cities nowadays, right? So a statement like media under stress supports the incumbent, that is a proposition. So that is a statement you will make, and you say whether it is proven or not in a case, after you finish a paper. What I find for qualitative papers is that sometimes often I would say the authors forget, and so you're looking for what is it trying to say? It's not clear. Whereas when you put a proposition, just like a hypothesis, then it's very clear what you're aiming for. So that's where it works out. But yes, I would say that for us, we tend to accept quantitative papers simply because the format structure works much, much better. Yeah. So qualitative paper you can, but just be careful how you organize and structure that paper.
Okay, thank you. Now, I guess Dr. Ang Fenghua, as a lawyer, would be able to answer this properly. Kindly discuss copyright transfer of articles. From what I know, correct me if I'm wrong, it's shared copyright for both the journal and the author, but maybe you know more about it.
No, in fact, most of the time the copyright goes entirely with the publisher. So you sign before you actually publish, you sign away a copyright. So in fact, a few places are fighting back. Harvard is one of them, but that's because it's Harvard, they can do it. But for most of us, we come from a weak bargaining position. We are happy people cite our work, right? So that's our reward. So the copyright transfer, I would say that it's currently from a very weak model. If you're coming from a strong university that publishes a lot, it might be possible for books, maybe entire journals, but not articles. So most of the time there is no transfer of copyright to us, the individual. And that's why, in fact, Europe, there's some kind of fighting back in this area.
Okay. Now, the other question here is this. Would you consider funding local researches that will be independently produced by students, alumni, or practitioners, but can still be peer reviewed by his or her alma mater or organization? Now, unfortunately for Media Asia, we don't have enough funding for local research. Now, what about AJC, Professor?
Yeah, no, there's no funding support. In fact, the funding, I don't know if you know this, but the funding support for AJC goes to support AMIC. AMIC needs the funding to carry on and provide services for us as academics. Yeah, so there's no funding support for research.
Yes, unfortunately. Anyway, okay, this is addressed to you, Dr. Ang Fenghua. Dr. Fenghua mentioned that the research focused on communication are mostly considered. What is the scope for research focused on a media text? So do you accept
media? Yeah, I know what they're saying. Yeah, looking at text and looking at it. So this comes from the literary tradition, and it's not so much in communication as whoever asked this question rightly noted, right? So it is much more literary, and whereas for us in both AJC as well as Media Asia, we are focused on media and communication. So media text, no, it will likely fall outside the mission of the AJC. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, okay, another question here. Maybe both of us can try to answer this. Why is it that some colleges seem to be too afraid to accept and consider qualitative papers as unscientific?
Okay.
Anyway, I don't know where this is coming from, but in the Philippines, much of the research conducted at the graduate level would be either qualitative or quantitative. So we don't discriminate. How is it the case in Singapore, Professor?
Yeah, so I can understand where it's coming from, because the rationale being that if you cannot prove it through empirical studies, then it's not scientific. But that's not true. What happens is that you need the theories to work on in order to prove it. So the qualitative papers, in fact, are actually very important. They give you the seed, the direction, the inspiration for theories to investigate. The quantitative papers investigate theories. But where do the theories come from? They come from qualitative papers. But the thing is that for qualitative papers, you have to write in a way that sort of appeals to people and it makes it understandable that these are thoughts, these are not tested. It doesn't mean they're not scientific, but you need to put them to some empirical test. But it's ideas that are being put out there for people to consider. So the qualitative papers, in fact, are very important to give you the base for your future empirical work. So they're not unscientific. That's not true. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Now, this is a question addressed to Media Asia directly. Would Media Asia be considering resubmitting to Scopus accreditation? Yes, that's part of the plan. Unfortunately, we're still in the process of stabilizing the operations of the journal, but you can be assured that that we are aware of the requirements for Scopus accreditation, and we will try our best to do that. Maybe just quickly, Dr. Ang Penghua, what is the status of Asian Journal of Communication as far as listing would be concerned?
Submitting to Scopus accreditation, is that the question?
Yeah, Scopus and other journal listings perhaps. Maybe you can elaborate. I know that Web of Science lists AJC, right?
Yeah, no, we don't submit to Scopus accreditation. The way we look at it would be through your citation impact factor. I mentioned that. The impact factor tells you how much it is cited. And also looking at something like Simago tells you where you are in the ranking overall. So we don't use the Scopus accreditation, no.
Okay, yeah. So next question, what about research studies using AMIC methods designed by Creswell? For Media Asia, we're welcome to accept any method, any framework, for as long as you're able to justify it. Okay.
Yeah, it will be the same, yeah, for AJC, yeah.
Yes. Now, next question. For a country like India, where we have dozens of states, is it possible that if we take a representative sample from one state and could be treated as the trend in a country based on the data collected from that particular state? It depends on the topic, because sometimes the focus of the study, you would only be able to draw conclusions from a particular state. You cannot say that in one state that will also be the case for the entire country. It depends, but most of the time that's the case. So my recommendation here is if you have a data set pertaining to one state, just draw conclusions on the trends for that state. Don't say that it's true for the entire country. Most especially for a country like India, which is very diverse, at least from what I understand. Yes. Would you like to add, Professor?
No, I think I totally agree with you. Yeah. Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. Is there any possibility of publishing my conceptual model developed based on my doctoral thesis in 2015, as it's been 5 years before? Note, this is an original work. It wasn't published anywhere. What do you think, Professor? It's a conceptual model that we developed.
Okay, the conceptual model, if, for example, if we say conceptual, it's highly, highly conceptual. Let's say philosophy. It will still be valid now, 2015 or not, because there's no data involved. But if there's data involved, then of course it's questionable whether it's still valid or not. You may need to incorporate new data to back up that your conceptual model is still valid. So it depends on what exactly this model is about. If it's a highly conceptual, fine. If it includes data, it will need updating.
Okay, so updating might be necessary if there is data that would serve as basis for the conceptual model. Okay, now next question. What are the usual modern methodologies, research designs accepted for international journals? Okay, Professor Penghua, is there such a thing as a modern methodology as opposed to an old methodology?
No, yeah, there isn't one model. The issue is, what question are you aiming to answer? If it's an important question, then you follow the method appropriate to it. and answer that question, and you'll stand a good chance of being published. So it's not a method that drives it, it's more the question that drives it. Yeah.
Yes, okay, yes, I agree. Now, next question, what are the usual, okay, it's the same. Okay, next question has to do with Media Asia. Is Media Asia a Web of Science or Scopus Index journal? And is it international or national journal? Right now, it's not yet listed in Web of Science or Scopus, but it is considered an international journal published by AMIC and Routledge, Taylor and Francis. Okay.
Yeah. Let me add to this. Danilo. So what happens is that I just forgot now that the Asian Journal of Communication is not Scopus, but it's on SSCI, the Social Science Citation Index. This is run by the private organization Thomson Reuters. So you should know this point. And it's kind of random in the way they choose it. How what gets in. The important point to note is okay, I can understand why this comes in because for appraisal and so forth, there's pressure from the universities. But for us as individuals, what happens is that what is most important is that you find your community of scholars. Who are those who read your works? Where are they meeting? Where are they congregating? So Media Asia would be very appropriate if you're talking to Asian scholars, Asian communicators. And so you wouldn't worry so much about getting to SSCI or Scopus Index journals. You need to worry a little bit, but it doesn't mean that you should avoid it totally, because if that's where your community of scholars are meeting, that's where you should be at.
Yeah, thank you. Now, this question pertains to AJC. For AJC, will there be a recommended content format like in Media Asia? Is it okay to follow an IMRAD intro, method, result, and discussion format to practically meet the less than 10,000 words needed for a manuscript? Okay, what do you think?
Yes, that's the sort of a standard method, standard structure and structure framework. Yes, that's right. I would agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, as part of the editorial board at this time and age, there is already world Englishes. So as an editor or reviewer, how will you respond to this? So, okay, given the onset of world Englishes, different types of the way we communicate in English.
When you say world English, what we mean in this case would not so much be world English as in there's one standard English. How do you spell emphasize? How do you spell color? Right? So what happens that you cannot spell color COLOUR in one paragraph and COLOR in another paragraph, the same manuscript. You have to spell it consistently, right? So that's why we mean that you can use any English. It should be consistent across the board. You don't flip back and forth within the same manuscript.
Yeah, okay. So consistency is the key here. Now, another question, how about modern research designs that use modern technology? Well, I guess for Media Asia, we're open to such things, but again, it depends on the focus of your study. You must be able to justify why you use modern research design. Okay, yeah. Now, so for Professor Peng Hua, what are your tips for framing a good research question?
Okay, so for this point, is actually a very critical point. It starts with a good research question. The good research question, remember, adds to new knowledge by adding to theory. So what you need to look for is do a good literature review to find out where are the gaps in the literature. What are people not knowing about in this area? What are the gaps? And then you fill that gap. Let me give an example where the gaps are filled. The third person effect. This is the best known effect about media. The third person effect says that media will have a more media sort of a bad content will have a more negative effect on you than on me, right? There's an optimistic bias that I won't be affected by the bad media. It's only you, right? And good content, I'll benefit more than you. I benefit from good content and you suffer from bad content. So third person effect. This area is so well researched. It's very hard to find new areas to research now, right? So people look at where you look for gaps. We fill in the gaps, and there's no more gaps now, or very few if you can, right? So now you look for some area where there are gaps, and often it will be in form of why is this happening, right? There's something mysterious, there's contradiction, there's something not quite right, and then you go and ask that question. That will be a good research question. You can find a gap, you can find a contradiction in the literature review. Those are good places to work on.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. I have submitted one of my articles to a journal. After 1 year, I received reviews or comments. Among the two reviewers, one says all okay or good, everything is sufficient. But another reviewer has some questions in different sections. In this situation, what would be my response to the journal? Perhaps I will try to answer first. Usually what happens is you have to follow everything that's being recommended by the reviewer. Now, in some cases where you're not able to fulfill a particular recommendation, you must be able to justify or explain why you think this particular recommendation should not be followed. But for the most part, the reviewer usually makes sense in whatever it is that he or she is trying to say. So, from an editorial viewpoint, you have to follow, even if there may be conflicting comments. Now, in case of conflicting comments, it's the editor who screens the comments and then decides before giving to you the comments. So, usually, what happens with the review process is there are cases where sometimes the comments of a reviewer may not be included in the letter to be sent to you because it conflicts with what the other reviewer is saying, and the other reviewer makes more sense in terms of the analysis. But Dr. Pengwa, maybe you have a different opinion about it.
No, I totally agree with you, Danilo. It happens to everybody at some point. It's we're only human. It happened to me when I'm a junior scholar. One of my first papers, in fact, it had the maximum score was 9. The minimum score was 3. I had 993. Had that 3 been just 5, I would have been a top paper because I had 2 perfect scores and then one that pushed me all the way. I was shocked. Like, how can this be, right? You think that people agree that 2, right? And 9, how come this third one says, 3? It's not even like 5, happens. The reason it happens is that remember, you're adding to new knowledge, right? So sometimes articles get sent to reviewers who don't really know that area. I've seen it happen before. And sometimes people are embarrassed. The reviewers are embarrassed sometimes. Some editors are embarrassed. It can't be helped. So what you do is that you answer to the best of your ability. This third reviewer, if the 2 says they're good, the third reviewer, and then go from there. So remember the manuscript with 58 reviews. 59 is this. Exactly the situation. One says, okay, clear. Remember, we've done 58 already, right? But this other reviewer says, no, it's a bad review. It should be rejected. No. So now we have to go back and explain to the editor why we think this reviewer is wrong, without saying that we've done it 58 times, right? Okay. So it happens, can't be helped. It's just human nature. So you do what you can. If you don't agree, pull out the article. It happened to me before. In fact, editor apologized to me and said, should I send it out because these reviewers didn't know? I said, no, I won't get in trouble because then you're behaving as though you're my friend, right? That's why you're doing this. So I pull out the article and send it somewhere else. So it can't be helped. If you can't agree with the editor, then agree to review them, put it out at some point and send it to some other journal.
Okay. Now, next question. Do you encounter issues with plagiarism? For example, there was no intention, but the material has 80% similarity to another work. I'm relatively new in Media Asia, but so far what I've encountered was a manuscript that was submitted to Media Asia, but was already published a couple of years ago. So that is also a form of resume padding or curriculum vitae padding on the part of an academic who would rather want to list more publications, but basically it's the same thing. So it's unacceptable. But from the experience of AJC, since you've been editor longer than I have you encountered plagiarism cases?
No, we don't often encounter plagiarism. We have had some issues similar to what Danilo mentioned. It's actually very serious and people are not aware how serious it is. What happens is that when you submit an article that is plagiarized or there's copyright issues, suppose it is printed and published, right? Somebody will find out at some point. Then the article gets retracted, right? So it will be shown as retracted, when you search, the name will be there, article will be there. Then it will show, oh, there's a blank, right? Got retracted. It's very embarrassing. And depending on how your university is, happened to somebody I know, unfortunately, this person was given bad information. This person reproduced just one table, identical to one published before. The second article was retracted. The person was suspended from the university for 6 months, once a whole semester. no pay. Remember, suspended from university for 6 months, no pay. And there's actually a blank in that journal to say that this article was retracted. It's a good researcher, was just given bad information that was okay to do it. One table, just one table, completely the same as published before elsewhere. So you have to be very, very careful. You definitely should, if your friends do it, tell them not to do it. You get into serious, serious trouble.
Okay. Now, this is a technical question. Some journals have a maximum number of authors. How many co-authors are allowed? I haven't thought about it honestly. In Media Asia, we don't have a limit on the number of co-authors. But for AJC, what's the case there?
No, there's no real limit. If you look at, for example, some medical journals, you can have 100, authors where the name of authors fill up one whole page and more, right? There's no such limit. I don't think it happens for communication, but there's no sort of a limit there. Number 23, you may have missed that, number 23.
Yes, okay. How to construct, yeah. How do you construct the novelty in the research article? Yes, I missed that, my mistake. Maybe you can try to answer that.
Okay, yeah, so this is the point about the research question. So you go back to your literature review, find out the gaps in the literature. Where are the questions to be answered in the literature? Are there contradictions? Are there questions? That's where the novelty comes in. That's how you contribute to new knowledge, by contributing to the theory in this area. So the literature review tells you the gaps in that area.
Yeah, okay. Now, quickly, this pertains to Asian Journal of Communication. Does your journal accept grounded theory research instead of testing Western theories?
Yeah, so let me be clear. Yeah, we do not accept just testing Western theories. The grounded theory depends again. The issue is whether there's something new that offering. If it is, we will look at it. Yeah, if it's grounded theory as well, it's nothing really new or it's minor, then we will not look at it either.
Okay. Now, there are a lot of questions still here, but I will try to practice my editorial prerogative the questions beforehand. I'm sorry because we're a little bit over time now.
Yeah.
Now, okay, maybe this question: if we use mixed method approach, what would be the representative size of the samples? I think for Asian Journal of Communication, as you noted, it's 300. But for Media Asia, it depends on how well you can justify the sample, as well as the sampling technique that you've adopted. So it depends on the focus. Okay, now for AJC, this is specific to you, Dr. Ang Fenghua. Is there any specific research time frame that is acceptable?
I don't know what he means by research time frame. It's as long as the paper comes in, we'll look at it. But if you mean that your article is old, sometimes sitting up there, the issue is whether it is current or not. So if it's, I mentioned this person work was 2013, data collected 2013. So the longer you sit, then the less current it may be, then they may be out. So it depends on the context, the kind of question that you're looking at to look at the research time frame.
Okay. Is there any chance that I can check whether Media Asia is interested in my topic of research before writing the manuscript following their style? Yes, you can send me an email directly and I'll be more than happy to communicate with you. My email address is in the call for paper, so you can get in touch with me anytime. So feel free to do so. Thank you. Now, what about mixed method researches? When writing for a journal, should I separate them and write 2 journal articles for each method? Okay, what's your opinion, Dr. Fenghua?
No, it's not that way. The issue is it's not driven by method. It's the research question. So look at the research question. How do you answer the research question? Is it mixed method or one method? So whichever method or methods work for your research question, that is the one to go for.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry if I'm skipping some questions here now. Okay, one question is, can we distinguish between editor, associate editor, and reviewer? Well, basically, the editor or the editor-in-chief will be responsible for providing the editorial direction for the journal. For example, Dr. Ang Fenghua says that he wants theoretical articles or conceptual articles. Media Asia is geared towards empirical studies or relevant issues. So these are the editorial direction. The associate editors help achieve the vision and they help identify the reviewers for the paper. Now, the referees or the reviewers, they are the ones who evaluate the content of the paper. From our experience, much of the time goes both to the authors and the reviewers in terms of evaluating the articles. In the case of Media Asia, I should be transparent enough to tell you that sometimes we give them 15 to 30 days, but usually it's 30 days before they can submit their evaluation upon accepting our invitation for them to be reviewers. Okay, next question. For both Media Asia and AJC, do you accept literature review type or meta-analysis articles? Dr. Fenghua?
Yeah, we do. We accept the meta-analysis, but you should offer some insights. So typically, such meta-analysis is done when there's a tension in the field. I mentioned a gap. There's two different groups of studies showing two different results. And what do you actually look at? To show one side is more correct than the other. This is your meta-analysis. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. In the case of Media Asia, again, our bias is toward empirical study. But if ever there are meta-analysis articles, we have two options. We can include them as commentaries or non-refereed articles, or we can still include it, but you must be able to provide a solid and deep documents analysis and literature review. In other words, there should be hundreds upon hundreds of literature that you conduct where you have done the research. Okay. So again, this is for both of us. What is our stand regarding plagiarism? Do you blacklist the author? And if yes, how long? The answer is yes, we blacklist. What about AJC?
We haven't talked about this actually because we don't really face the issue. But yes, we will blacklist a person, of course. Yes.
Okay. Now, would you be interested in a journal research about digital media in Central Asia? Yeah, why not? Why not?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, AJC accept systematic literature. Okay, does AJC accept systematic literature review?
Yes, we do, of course. But it's a meta-analysis approach, and you got to find something at the end of it. So it's not just a review, but at the end of it, something interesting that I didn't know before. If it's just gathering a systematic literature review, I'm not interested because anybody can do that. But what is new about this, right? That's the question. What is new about this systematic literature review at the end of the day?
Okay, thank you. Now, is it possible that a research about communications related to social work be qualified or accepted in Media Asia or AJC? Yes, because media as a mediated form of communication is not just confined to radio, TV, print, or other methods. So any other forms of mediated communication may be acceptable in Media Asia for as long as it's empirical in nature. So yes, we are interested in it. Okay. Any comments?
Yeah, so social work, it has to link to media in some way, media or communication. So social work by itself, no, definitely out of the mission because it's the AJC communication. If no communication, we are not interested.
Okay. Yes, this is an interesting question about ethics review. Does AJC or Media Asia require ethics review when a study involves human subjects? Okay. Okay, maybe I will start. For Media Asia, we don't require ethics review because we assume that for manuscripts that are submitted to Media Asia, it went through the process of research and that the researcher was ethical enough to provide certain mechanisms for privacy, for security of the human subject. So for example, with focus or in-depth interviews, sometimes we allow articles not to identify or not to give away certain information on the identities of the people that they interview so that their anonymity can be protected. Okay. Now
for AJC, what happens is it depends on the human subjects. If it is just a survey and it's adults, then we don't even ask for this because typically these are not an issue. But if the questions are sensitive, yes, we do ask for proof that it was reviewed. And if it involves children, in fact, I've written to the person to ask me to show me the documentation that there was an ethics review on the study. So it depends on what is actually done in the study.
Okay. Professor Ang Fenghua, this is addressed to you. I have written an article which is theory heavy, but for solidification of my argument, I used in-depth interviews with 10 respondents and a survey of 72 respondents. So it's a mixed method approach, but it doesn't fulfill the 300 that you mentioned a while ago. So is this okay?
Let me say that I love you, whoever you are, but sorry, yeah, 300 is the minimum that we require, because I went over this with my AAEs, and in fact, they tell me off like, hey, this, we've got some standards to keep. We need 300 minimum, right? It's the absolute minimum. So I'm sorry to say, but the 10 may be your quantitative report, qualitative study, but 72 for survey is definitely out. We will not run in AJC.
Okay. Okay, this is another interesting question. What can you say about others' work, about the other work of some researchers publishing 1 to 2 problems of their study and reserving some of their problems to other journals? So it's something like you have a big study and then you slice them up so that you can come up with not just one but several manuscripts. Is there any ethical issue there?
Yeah, it's not an ethical issue. We call it salami slicing. You cut it up, into fine bits and publish it. The main issue is that you are able to make it coherent within that one thin slice. And because there's a lot of pressure to publish, you can understand why people chop it out of the way. My own experience has been that actually it can be done. Some people have done it really well. But if you do that, I know of people who have the tenure rejected because it's salami slice, and I guess the tenure board felt that it was just one big study or a few big studies, opposed to seeing that many there. And my own experience has been that I had done some salami slicing, didn't go so well, and I kind of regret it. So it's better to have one really good, solid study and try to chop it up. If you can, good luck to you. But for many people, I would say that probably better not to salami slice.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we're already a little bit, over time. So maybe we can just go for, some part away. Okay, yeah. So just a couple of announcements here, Professor Penghua. If you don't mind, I'll read them out loud and then we go to the closing remarks. So the nominations for the 2020 AMIC Asia Communication Award is still open. So please visit the AMIC website for nomination forms and other details. And the AMIC Secretariat has sent letters and announcements to AMIC members and friends crowdsourcing for photos and other memorabilia related to AMIC's 50th anniversary in 2021. Okay? Please share your AMIC memories. So we want to thank our colleagues who participated in the webinar from the following countries: India, Australia, United Arab Emirates, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia, Bangladesh, United States, the Philippines, Thailand, Spain, Myanmar, Vietnam, Singapore, and Kazakhstan. So again, thank you very much. Professor Ang Penghua, maybe we can have 1 or 2 minutes for our parting remarks.
Okay, no, I'm happy that there are so many questions, a lot of interest. I hope you found the presentation by me useful and the questions useful as well, answers useful as well. Okay, sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Penghua. So I will not give my closing remarks anymore because Dr. Ang Penghua already said everything in 2 minutes or so. So again, thank you very much to all of you. So I wish you well, and amid the global pandemic, please stay safe and healthy. So this is Danilo Araw, and this is Dr. Ang Penghua, wishing you all goodbye, and wherever you are, God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.